Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you all for joining us in the third Providing Farm Insights Remotely series. Today we're going to be talking all about FARMAX 8, so that will include a demo of some of our newer features and also answering any of your questions on some of the things that are new with FARMAX 8. So we're also very lucky to be joined this morning by Gavin McEwen. So Gavin, for those who don't know him already, is the CEO here at FARMAX. And Gavin's going to be speaking a little bit to kind of some of our thoughts behind FARMAX 8 and why we developed it in the first place. So that's the plan for today. So we're going to hand over to Gavin first. Please feel free to ask questions throughout and we'll answer them as best we can, but I will hand over to Gavin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. And good morning to everybody and thanks for joining us this morning. I hope all of you have had a takeaway fix by now, Big Macs or pizzas or whatever. Personally, I'm just hanging out for a haircut at the moment, so hopefully it's not too far away. The FARMAX team are very excited about the latest release of FARMAX called FARMAX 8. And really, it's an example of what our vision is at FARMAX, and that's about helping farmers farm sustainably. And by sustainably, that has a number of different aspects. We believe sustainability on the farm covers a multitude of things. It covers the production side of things, having a farm system that produces sustainably, having a farm system that is profitable, having a farm system that is meeting all the needs from an environmental perspective. And the key is getting the balance between all those areas in the farm system. And in order to help our customers farm sustainably, we need to keep the FARMAX software relevant. And we recognise that the issues in farming today are quite complex. They require balance, and we're very lucky to have a shareholder, Ag Research Limited, the leading pastoral Crown Research Institute in New Zealand, to help us enable the science they provide into the FARMAX application. And they expect us to create an impact in the industry. And in the almost 18 years that we've been in existence, we've certainly done that. Some research that we did last year, looking at red meat farms over the last decade that are using FARMAX, their gross margin was 63% higher than other farms, and on average that contributed 183,000 to the bottom line of the farm. So look, we continue to make those changes in order for our users to look at the overall perspective. And we've had a lot of requests over the years for our users to see how changes to their farm system will show up in the outputs of that farm system. So that if they need to mitigate environmental outputs, if they need to change elements of production, they can investigate those options in FARMAX and see, as they always have done in FARMAX, see the production side of things, see the profitability side of things, and now in FARMAX 8 have some environmental indicators as well. So that's what we feel is very important in today's farming environment, and we're very excited to release FARMAX Red Meat 8 a couple of weeks ago. the dairy version will be coming shortly afterwards. And just to cover the key changes that we've made to FARMAX 8, and Tom, if you just click on the slide there, we can now provide greenhouse gas reporting from within FARMAX. We can accommodate the ability to model the effects of forestry blocks, either existing or proposed. And what you won't see, because it's under the covers, is our ability to integrate with other platforms, other software systems. And with FARMAX 8, we want to enable the ability to see the overall effect of changes to the farm system, but we also recognise that if people want to do a deep dive in certain areas, there's also other very good software-based models available, like Overseer and Forecaster from Scion. So look, that's probably it from me at this stage. I'll hand back to Tom, but Tom, when did you want to do the questions, now or later?
Yeah, sure. So we'll probably save the questions to the end. So feel free to put them in there now if you do have any. Gavin, I might get you to mute and stop your video, but Gavin will be hanging around till the end to answer any questions that you might have for him. So feel free to fire those through. So perfect. So the next part of today's webinar is to essentially give you a demo of FARMAX 8 and some of the newer features. So like Gavin mentioned, we've got some features in there around greenhouse gases and forestry, and how changes to those aspects of a farm system influence all three kind of areas of the business. So how does that influence your production? How does that influence your financial performance? And how does that influence the environmental metrics of the property as well? So I've got an example farm here, and this is the same example farm that you will have seen in the first webinar. And just I'll quickly answer Paul's question. I see we've got a question around how far away is the dairy version of FARMAX 8. So I'll talk a little bit to the dairy version shortly after we've gone through the red meat demo. But to answer that question, we are looking at the next couple of weeks for FARMAX 8 dairy. So firstly, let's have a look at some of our greenhouse gas reports. So we have essentially a new greenhouse gas report at a few different levels within FARMAX. So for this one at the moment, you're looking at the whole farm greenhouse gas report. We also have this available at a few different levels if you want to kind of dive deeper with your greenhouse gas reporting. So at this sort of top farm level, so when I'm clicked up on Hawke's Bay, which is the farm name, and monitoring, we've got a whole farm greenhouse gas report. If I just was interested in the greenhouse gas outputs for the sheep, as an example, I could click down to the sheep. I've also got a greenhouse gas report at this level, and I can even dive down to looking at some of the individual mobs and seeing some of the greenhouse gas numbers for those mobs, and sort of tracking where those CO2 equivalents have been produced sort of throughout the season. So those are the locations of the reports and where you'll find them. In terms of some of the numbers coming out, so we're following the New Zealand inventory method to come up with a lot of these numbers. Many of these figures, especially methane, are driven by the feed intake of stock. So that is something that FARMAX has had a pretty good handle on for quite a long time. And that's how we're arriving at a lot of these figures. So one of the cool things that you can do with FARMAX specifically, which some of the other tools don't necessarily offer is we are looking at giving you an overall picture of the farm. So you'll see we've also got some metrics tied in here around CO2 equivalent per dollar of gross margin for the farm. And we've also got kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of product. So you can now get a pretty good handle on some of the efficiency metrics there for both financial and production. And again, you can see that across each of your different enterprises. So if I were to look at the sheep, for example, we're producing around 16 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of product. And if we were to look at bull beef, we're only producing around 11.8 kilograms of CO2 per kilo of product. So feel free to keep your questions coming through and we will answer them throughout. But that's a bit of an overview of some of the new greenhouse gas reporting we've got there. You can also look into some of the numbers sort of behind the scenes that are helping us arrive at these reports. So we've got a breakdown tab where you can see the various different greenhouse gases that contribute to that overall CO2 equivalent number. We've also got a source, so you can see what's coming from sheep, what's coming from beef, what's coming from deer, etc. And also by pathway. So if you're wanting to dive into some of the finer details there, feel free to do so. So that is an overview of one of the first main changes with FARMAX 8 red meat is adding in some greenhouse gas reporting. The next thing I'd like to show you is adding in forestry blocks and undeveloped blocks, which is also a new feature of FARMAX. And throughout, I'm hoping to also give you a few sort of tips and tricks of some things we've added in, which aren't major new reports or anything like that, but can make life a little bit easier when using FARMAX. And one of those things is being able to pin reports in sort of a sidebar. So forever, you've been able to pop out FARMAX reports by clicking this little pop-out button above print. You can then sort of monitor what happens with your greenhouse gases or pasture cover or profit and loss or whatever it is, whatever report you'd like to look at. You can pop that out, have that on the side and kind of monitor changes as you adjust stock numbers and stock performance and so on. We've now added in a handy feature, which I'm just going to use here. If I hold the control button and click that same pop-out button, it will put the CO2 equivalents in a little sidebar here. So in this case, I'm going to go through and add in a forestry block. And what you'll see is when I add in that forestry block, you should also actually see some of those CO2 equivalent numbers changing. So at the moment, I've got my report filtered to display per total hectare. And per total hectare is going to include some of these new blocks that I'm going to add in. So currently we're producing about 5 tonne CO2 equivalent per hectare. If I go ahead and add in a forestry block, and let's call that forestry block 150 hectares, you'll see that CO2 equivalent per hectare start to drop down. So those forestry blocks can be added just simply by right-clicking on the farm level, adding a new block. And it's the same method to add in other undeveloped blocks. So I'm going to add in an undeveloped block here and call this something like native bush as an example. And let's say we've got 300 hectares of native bush. You should see that again start to reflect some changes in our per hectare CO2 emissions. So that is a quick overview of some of our new block types. And those are a lot of the main changes in FARMAX 8 red meat in terms of some of the more major features. We're definitely keen to hear your feedback on other things that you'd also like to see. So you'll see that the forestry inputs at the moment have got some basic inputs around the species of that forest, the area, but would like to get your feedback on additional reports that you'd like to see. Would you like to see carbon credits or some financial analysis of those forestry blocks and that sort of thing? Let us know, and that's certainly some ideas that we're open to hearing. So in terms of some other new features that we'll just go over, you've heard me talk about area a little bit already. So I'm back up at the top level and in properties. And in this section of FARMAX, we've got a few new area types. So traditionally, all that FARMAX cared about was how much of the farm was in grass. And we've expanded our horizons a little bit there. So we've got 3 area types now. Total area is essentially the sum of all the blocks that I've got on the left-hand side here. So in this example, I've got a hills block, a flats block, and now a forestry and native bush block as well. That adds up to 1,300 hectares, and that's the figure that has been used to run your sort of per total hectare stats in a number of the reports in FARMAX. So that's the first area type. Farm area of 850 hectares, so that's probably what you'd traditionally think of as the effective area. In this case, it's just the sum of our hills and flats blocks. And we've also got a grazing area. So that is basically the average area throughout the season that's in pasture. It is almost the sum of our hills and flats, but in this example, we've got a little bit of area that is out for crop for part of the season. So it's going to be taking that sort of average area out for crop figure away from the farm area. And we can use all of those different areas to look at various greenhouse gas reports and so on. So those are some area changes. Cool. So I see we've got a few questions coming through here. So I will just pause and answer some of these. So first question is, can you select which existing block the forestry block is created from as farm area is fixed? Doesn't seem to be in the version you're demonstrating. Yeah, cool, good point. So for a long time, the farm area has been fixed in FARMAX. So if you ever wanted to model taking on a new lace block, or you did have area going into forestry, or had one of those situations, traditionally you'd have to give us a ring, and then we'd change the sort of area setting at our end and let you do that. In this case, we still do have some of the areas fixed. So the number that we still have locked in is the farm area. So that 850 hectares, which is our hills and flats, you can add as much forestry or undeveloped blocks on top of that as you like. And another question from Lockie, what's the difference between forestry and other in terms of change in carbon? So at the moment, and that's sort of good feedback and something we'd like to hear, Lockie. So at the moment, all that those forestry blocks are doing in terms of the sort of carbon accounting are increasing the area that we're dividing by. So at the moment, we're not capturing sort of carbon sequestration from those forestry blocks or anything like that. But that's something we've already had a few requests for. So if you're also interested in that, definitely let us know. Okay, so that is areas. Next up, I'm going to show you a couple of the newer features that we've made to, or newer changes that we've made to existing features in FARMAX. And the first one we're going to have a look at actually is around crops and feeds. And the change here is we've given users a bit more flexibility in terms of setting up some of the properties of their supplements. So this is actually a request we had quite commonly from many of our dairy users. So this will definitely be in the dairy version of FARMAX 8 also. But essentially what we've added in is you now have the ability to edit the ME and the utilization figures for your supplements on a monthly basis. So traditionally, if you put in this example, an 11 ME for silage, it would be 11 ME all season, and anytime you fed it out throughout the year, it would assume 11 ME. So silage is a pretty common example where we had a request for this feature. So let's say you've got an example where you purchase in some silage and it's 10 ME, you've got another cut of silage that you make at home and that's 11 ME, and you've got kind of different quality silages that have been fed at various times throughout the year. So previously, what you'd end up doing is you'd have sort of 2 or 3 or 4 different types of silage, all with different properties. So now you've got the ability to just edit that on a monthly basis to reflect what's actually been offered to stock. And similar sort of setup with utilization. So if you've got periods of the year where there's different utilization assumptions you'd like to use for your supplements, you're welcome to add that in as well. And we also have actually added that on a price basis. So if you're someone that is purchasing in feed, like let's say palm kernel, for example, and you haven't contracted any and you're purchasing palm kernel at various different prices kind of throughout the season, you've now got the ability to also reflect that in your financials for the crops and feeds as well. So that is another one of our new features. The last thing I'd like to show you on the FARMAX 8 red meat side is a new feature that we've added in around paddocks. So for a little while now, you've had the ability to set up paddocks in FARMAX, and traditionally that was really just used to help FARMAX calculate an average farm cover essentially. So you can add those paddocks in if you haven't already by going into your cover measurements tab, and you'll see that you've got a little add by paddock button down here. And for this particular farm, I've got a few different paddocks set up, pretty basic. You can see my various paddock names I've added in there. But one of the cool things that you can now do is actually use these paddocks in other places in FARMAX outside of just calculating an average farm cover. So a good example of that is with our nitrogen and cropping events. So if I head down to nitrogen, in this example, it looks like I have got a nitrogen event there for mid-April. Traditionally, we've seen a lot of times people are kind of sitting there manually calculating a lot of numbers to try and figure out the amount of area that fertilizer went on. So now what you can do is, if you've got a good handle on what paddocks that fertilizer went on, you can just pick the paddocks out of the list essentially and have FARMAX calculate that application. So to do that, you'll see you've got a little ellipsis here next to our 50 hectares by the area. You can click on that. At the moment, I'm saying that we put our nitrogen application on the lease block, or on the lease paddock, I should say. Let's say I also put it on the home paddock and the airstrip. So I can select those three, hit OK, and that'll recalculate our nitrogen area for us. And the same features are available with cropping. So if I went in and put in a cut of pasture silage as an example, we can pop that in, and I can pick under the area tab that I cut the bowling green for silage. So there we go, and that will calculate the area automatically for us. So hopefully that speeds things up for everyone. So that completes our overview of FARMAX 8 red meat. So feel free to continue firing through any questions that you might have. And while you're doing that, I am just going to share this PowerPoint again. And just talk you through what you can expect to see with our FARMAX 8 dairy release that's coming in the next couple of weeks. So you will see that there are a lot of similarities with what's just been released in the red meat version of FARMAX. So you'll get greenhouse gas reporting just like you get in FARMAX 8 red meat, as we've demonstrated today. There'll be some slight differences there. So with some of our efficiency numbers, obviously in red meat, we're focused on CO2 equivalents per kilogram of product. That product is going to be milk, obviously, on the dairy side, rather than carcass and wool and velvet like you'd get in the red meat version. So some slightly different KPIs, but largely a very similar set of reports that you'll get in FARMAX 8 dairy. One of the things we are adding in FARMAX 8 dairy that is not actually in the red meat version is a nitrogen balance. So this is a tool that is intended to give you an indication of essentially the total nitrogen coming into the farm versus through, say, fertilizer and purchased feed versus what's going off the farm in milk production and any live weight gain or cull cows or anything that's kind of leaving the farm. And what that will do is give you an overall nitrogen balance. We're following Dairy NZ's sort of logic on that one. And again, like a lot of these environmental metrics that we've added into FARMAX 8, it's intended to at least give you an indication of which direction things are heading with your nitrogen balance or with your greenhouse gases, with changes that you might make on farm. And obviously, you'll also get the profitability and the production implications of that change as well. So hopefully we're capturing the whole picture there. One of the other things which many of our monitoring users will probably be quite happy to see is auto milk calibration. So traditionally, when you enter actual milk production into FARMAX dairy, there's a few steps you kind of have to go through to calibrate the FARMAX figures to your actual production. And that's typically a manual process of pushing your pasture intake offered to cows up or down to kind of get milk production in the right place. Happy to say that we've automated that part of FARMAX now. So what that'll look like in practice is you'll put in your milk production for a particular month. You'll make sure you've got your supplementary feeding and your stock numbers and so on correct, and then you can just hit calibrate and it will calculate how much pasture must have been offered to the cows in order to do that level of production. Cool. So we've also got a genetic merit update coming out. So that's just intended to align with some of the later base years and changes to the way that breeding worth is calculated in practice. And we have also some performance screen enhancements coming out. So that one is intended to give you a bit more flexibility around how you set up your diet for the cows. Traditionally, the way that is set up is you're offering everything on a kilos of dry matter per cow per day basis. And that works well, but it can sometimes be tricky to, I guess, calculate those figures. So what we're going to allow you to do now is enter just a total amount fed. So for example, if you had, if you were in January and you fed 100 bales of silage across the farm through January, you can literally just type in 100 bales and it will calculate what that per head allocation must have been. So it'll figure out that that was 2.5 kilos per cow per day as an example. So those are some of the things you can expect to see in FARMAX 8. And like I mentioned earlier, first half of May is the target release date for that. So that concludes the presentation. I see we have got a couple of questions still coming through. And if you have got any final questions, definitely put them through. So we've got a question from Paul. Are the outputs of the greenhouse gas module comparable to the overseer output? So the short answer to, well, yeah, the answer to that is they should be comparable, but they definitely won't be the same. So one of the main drivers for that is simply the difference in the way that overseer and FARMAX model a farm system. So in both models, you're trying to figure out feed supply, feed demand, get a good picture of what the intake of stock is throughout the season. And those will look slightly different in each of the two tools. So we expect you'll see a lot of the same trends. So if you see a greenhouse gas number going up in FARMAX, we do expect that to happen in overseer as well, but they won't line up exactly. Where are we? Cool, and we've got a few coming through on the chat. Cool, we've got a couple of comments just saying yes to carbon sequestration and carbon credit. So we've got that from Paul and from Terry, so that's great to hear. That's very good feedback. And a question from Laura: will FARMAX 8 will be available for all levels of the FARMAX system analysis and monitoring? Yes, it will. So you'll be able to add all of those block types and see the greenhouse gas reporting at all subscription levels. Munter Nelson: the new carbon credits are just that. As a farmer, we don't know what's good or bad. Have you got some ranges that we can see to decide the numbers we're generating? So that's not something that I know off the top of my head, but I will do some digging at our end and see if I can get some ranges on kind of typical greenhouse gas outputs for you. I'll see what I can do there. We do plan on sending you all an email with a replay to this webinar and a bit of a summary. So leave that one with me. I'll try get that added into the follow-up email from the webinar. So can't answer that today, sorry, but we'll get something to you. Perfect. So feel free to fire through any other questions if you would like. Okay. Perfect. So I don't see too many other questions coming through. Late arrival from Laura. Is there a confirmed release date for FARMAX 8? Yeah, so first half of May is what we're targeting, so within the next couple of weeks. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions coming through. So thank you all very much for joining us today. That does conclude this webinar and also the 3 in the series. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you did enjoy the series and it gave you some helpful tips on working remotely with clients. Just one final thing that I will mention before we go. I know I've mentioned this already in the last couple of webinars, but with the drought situation in many parts of the country, we are offering FARMAX Lite for free to red meat farmers with part of the beef and lamb drought relief initiative. So we have had a few people take us up on that offer, which is really good to see. So if that is something you're interested in, feel free to contact the help desk and we can get you set up with that. So again, thank you all very much for joining us. That concludes today's webinar. So thank you all for joining along with the series, and we hope to see you in future webinars as well.